The town of Pripyat was asleep. 49,000 people, families, children, newlyweds still dancing at a wedding on Lesia Ukrainka Street, breathing the cold April air, without a single thought of danger. The night was clear. The stars were out. 3 kilometers away, the 4 reactor blocks of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant glowed against the darkness, like a small, industrial city. Inside the control room of reactor number 4, the atmosphere was different. The night shift had inherited a safety test, a procedure designed to measure whether the plant's turbines could power emergency cooling systems during a blackout. It had been postponed twice already, pushed from the day shift to the evening shift, and finally to these men after midnight, when fatigue had already begun to dull the edges of every judgment in the room. The reactor was not in a normal state. Hours of unstable operation had filled the core with xenon-135, a byproduct of nuclear fission that suppresses the chain reaction and makes the reactor dangerously unpredictable. They were overruled. The order to proceed had come from Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer, a man whose authority in that room was absolute. The operators returned to their consoles and obeyed. This was not weakness. This was survival. In the Soviet system, the man who raised his voice at the wrong moment did not get promoted. He disappeared. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, the test sequence was initiated. The reactor's power began to climb, not in a controlled rise, but in a sudden, violent surge that overwhelmed every instrument trying to track it. The emergency shutdown was triggered immediately. Control rods began descending into the core, but the RBMK 1000 reactor had a design flaw, one that Soviet nuclear physicists had privately identified years earlier and recorded in classified documents. The graphite tips of the control rods, upon insertion, caused a brief but catastrophic spike in reactivity before suppressing it. In a stable reactor, this effect was tolerable. In a xenon-poisoned reactor at dangerously low power, it was a death sentence. In approximately 3 seconds, reactor number 4 produced an energy output so far beyond its designed limits that the number meant nothing anymore. The first explosion was a steam blast of extraordinary violence. The second followed within seconds. The 1,000-ton steel and concrete lid of the reactor was hurled vertically into the night sky. The core was open. Burning fragments of graphite and nuclear fuel were thrown across the roof of the building and into the surrounding grounds. The night sky above reactor 4 turned a deep, vivid violet, a color that had no name in the vocabulary of anyone watching, because no one watching had ever seen a burning reactor core before. Firefighters from Pripyat station arrived within minutes. Their dispatch call had described a roof fire. They came in standard uniforms with standard equipment, and they walked directly into one of the most intensely radioactive environments in human history. Some of them later described a strange metallic taste in their mouths and a warm tingling on the skin. They kept working. By dawn, the first men were vomiting. By morning, they were being flown to Moscow's hospital number 6. Within weeks, the most exposed among them were dead. They had gone to work that night, believing they were fighting a fire. They had no idea what they were actually inside. In Moscow, the information traveling up the chain of command was being carefully shaped at every level. By the time it reached Mikhail Gorbachev, the word explosion had been removed. The reactor was described as damaged, not destroyed. Radiation levels were described as elevated but stable. The situation, he was assured, was under control. It was not under control. A radioactive plume was already moving silently across the night sky, northwest, across Ukraine, across Belarus, across the Polish border, across Sweden. The Soviet Union had not yet told its own citizens what had happened. The world found out from a dosimeter in Stockholm. Pripyat was evacuated 36 hours after the explosion. Residents were told it was temporary. Pack for 3 days, the loudspeaker announcement said. Most residents left everything behind: their apartments, their photographs, their children's toys. The city has been empty ever since. Over 600,000 men were eventually mobilized as liquidators, soldiers, miners, engineers, helicopter pilots, sent to contain a disaster that their government had spent the first critical hours pretending was not happening. Many of them received radiation doses that cut years from their lives. The official Soviet death toll from Chernobyl was recorded as 31. Independent research organizations estimate the true number of premature deaths attributable to the disaster in the tens of thousands. A precise figure has never been established, because a precise investigation was never truly permitted. Reactor number 4 did not fail because one operator made one mistake on one night. It failed because a system that ran on fear and silence had been in operation for decades before that night. The warnings existed, the data existed, the men who understood what the data meant existed. What did not exist in the Soviet Union of 1986 was a mechanism by which the truth could travel upward without being stopped softened, and buried somewhere along the way. Chernobyl was not an accident. It was the inevitable output of a machine that had been designed from its foundations to produce exactly this kind of silence.